Now, the way that I approach this as a coach, as a mentor, as also as an individual myself, is I do my best to understand that whoever I'm talking to or whatever I'm dealing with inside of myself is going to be related to some type of domain of belief, some type of domain of subconscious programming. Now, not everybody is always under the influence of programming, but it's pretty common, and in many ways it's sort of easier to start with the idea that our conditions and our upbringing and our programming and the foundations of the way that we see reality and the visions that we have of reality are going to be more or less subconscious programs that are really the essence of how we're operating in the world. So to answer your question, it's like a man who's coming from this emotional inhibition, this emotional reservation, he is probably running from some type of unconscious belief that it's scary or it's weak or it's vulnerable to share his emotions in a way. And he may well have learnt through bad experiences or through the opinions of others that if he does share his emotions, that women are going to betray him, women are going to leave him, people are not going to trust him, people are going to hurt him. And unfortunately, that can be true. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that men do have these experiences of women feeling the ick. You know, women get the ick, which is once again not a particularly advanced, emotionally intelligent term with a lot of details, but oftentimes women are not consciously aware themselves. They just know that they're subconsciously reacting to a man's construct of masculinity in the moment. So his identity, his behavior, his approach to her in the moment is going to give her a kind of an ooh or an ick, you know, sort of. And then in many ways, women are often running from these very basic kind of barometers or registers of like, does it make me go ooh or does it make me go ick? And then she just kind of has a, you know, an attraction or repulsion type of response. So in many ways, women do actually offer men a very interesting interface for understanding themselves based on that. But we also got to be aware that it would be pretty dangerous to act as a man looking for only oohs or icks from women as the main reading of who he is and how the world works. Because there could be a lot of reasons why things are happening inside of him and the ways in which he's basically showing up in his behavior. And there are plenty of circumstances where he's actually, you know, a good person doing the right thing at the right time, and he's just dealing with his situation, but it's not being understood or observed or supported correctly from the world or from women. And he gets like ick responses, or he gets attack responses, or he gets like fear responses or negative responses from the world around him. Now, really what that's pointing to is something that's a little bit more of a complex subject matter, which is that he has got shadow material that he needs to deal with. And what's shadow material? Shadow material is unconscious habit patterns, thoughts, beliefs, you know, insecurities about himself that he's not facing, he's not coming to terms with, he's under the influence of. And in a weird way, that stuff is then projecting out into the world and creating certain circumstances and experiences of the world that he is showing up as. And then what happens is people just respond to him and treat him the way that his shadow is actually teaching others to treat him. His shadow is getting women to respond to him that way. Now, obviously, he can't see that because he's under the influence of the shadow. He's under the influence of his unconscious blindness. So for a man to come out of these habit patterns, whether it's being a man who's too reserved and doesn't share his feelings and therefore he feels numb, or a man that's too expressive and makes himself vulnerable to attack and maybe puts himself into a position of not being able to hold his masculine force with the intensity that a reserved man could, he needs to learn on either side about what's the shadow material in either of those tendencies. What's it called? How does it work? What's the habit pattern? How does he do it? What can he do instead? And once again, this is my work. So the work of working with a good masculinity mentor, working with a good coach, or potentially a good therapist if they're trained in the right things, is that somebody can help you to kind of grow through these stages of blindness and integrate your ego development into being more stronger intentions and capabilities of your identity as a man, as a human. And the bigger picture of what we would call that is really this journey of masculine initiation. It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. So what does it involve to, this masculine initiation process? Like, how do men become men? How do they build this masculine energy so that they can be the ultimate man, not just for themselves, but for others?
Well, it's a kind of a quest that a man needs to learn to call himself into. And it is an interesting one because generally we have had a lot of context in the past that gave us some type of container for that masculinity. So, for example, if the primary role of a masculine figure is to be a father, for example, to be a provider, for example, maybe to be somewhat of a skilled man, which might be a tradesman or some type of once again, like a member of society, or, in its higher form, potentially as a leader, potentially as a creator, potentially as someone who's like an innovator, a problem solver. So we look at those types of masculine roles, masculine trait roles. And in a society where those are honored, merited, supported, given a feedback system so that men can learn to step into them and understand them, then they become pathways. They become learning pathways. They become skill development, like trees of a man. It's like he builds a skill tree, like a video game character. He develops himself in these roles and in these capabilities. Now, if he's in a healthy environment with healthy adults, healthy men, hopefully healthy women, hopefully some sort of healthy society, then his probability and capability to become a healthy man according to all those metrics is going to be decent. It's going to be good. As opposed to if we live in a time where we live now, where the consideration and the value of being a provider is a little bit uncertain. The consideration of being a father is also uncertain. The consideration of learning skills is also questionable because different containers or the context of what those roles are for are changing. So it's difficult for a man to want to be a father if he doesn't believe that fatherhood's going to have any value other than him basically sacrificing himself. It's going to be difficult for a man to want to become a provider if all that's in it for him is to be more or less a slave to other people's needs and not necessarily have a healthy sense of self inside of the life that he's having. And I think a lot of men intuitively feel this and are also concerned about this, and some are more conscious of it than others, but this creates a kind of masculinity crisis. Like there's this meaning crisis. And at the same time, as men are in the role of becoming men and needing to work out what it is to be a man and how to be a man and what the skills of being a man are, there is this other side, which is, women and to some degree, like society, which is also other men to a degree, is kind of judging and looking at that journey of the individual man and then making judgments and making opinions and making challenges and in many ways, expecting him to show up as that father, that provider, that problem solver, that innovator, even though he might not have the context or the support or the resources or the cultural support to be able to do that. And I think this creates this type of weird paradox that causes like a certain identity crisis, a certain like reality crisis in a lot of men out there. And for the men that are feeling that, for the men that are experiencing that, and they really need to go on this journey of self-development, self-mastery, self-awakening or self-realization or self-liberation or whatever you want to call it, self-actualization, this journey of his own mastery of his masculinity, the development of his masculinity, the transcendence of the limitations of his past, he needs to be able to put things into some type of a frame. So this comes to your question. How does a man become a man? Well, he needs to frame himself into a context of masculinity that makes sense. Ideally for him, but also in a way that's going to be effective for the rest of the culture and the tribe, the rest of the world, including women that he might want to be with, friends he might want to be with, places he might want to be. So now we have this question of, okay, if we've got a man who wants to become a man, he wants to be a better man, he wants to express himself as a man, he wants to be acknowledged as a man, well, he needs to frame himself in that position. And as he frames himself in that position, then he also needs to work out what's the game to win to get to the next stage of that outcome. Because in a way, whether we like it or not, I tend to have this view that like the world is game-like, right? So the world is not a game, but the ways in which we frame it with our theories, with our desires, with our outcomes, with our skill development, with our personalities, with the ways in which we see each other, our competitions, our status games, these are all games. And, to a degree, like you could say, well, a man is a man when he gets lots of muscles and he gets money in his bank account and he drives a cool big car and then he has a good job and he's able to like throw money around and impress women because he's got power and he's got authority and he's got these material resources. Well, that's a man in the eyes of some people. That's a man in the eyes of some women. But is that a man? Other people might say, well, no, a man is somebody who takes responsibility for their thoughts and their emotions and their decisions, and somebody that is wanting to build a philosophy and a world of meaning and connection with others that's bringing a certain type of like kingdom into experience. He's building a community. He's building a family. He's building a support system. He's building, his way in the world to be able to make sense of that. And honestly, like, it's a tough question that you ask because really it brings something very important into focus, which is that we don't have a particularly obvious formula for what it means to be a man in the mainstream. And as time goes on, that's going to be increasingly challenged as testosterone goes down, as masculine and feminine roles get more and more mixed, as society gets more and more confused about what the purpose of humans are, what the purpose of value is, what the purpose of family is, what the purpose of skills are. It's going to become weirder and weirder for people to understand who they are and how to relate to each other. But the answer, if we want to just put a quick answer, is men can start to look to the histories and the traditions, to the heroic paths of initiation of the past. They can look to their ancestors. They can look to the things that have led to good traits, good qualities, good capabilities over time against exactly these forces. Because the truth is, there's always been forces of cultural challenge. There's always been forces of deterioration and challenge of masculinity that have put men into a scary position. And there's been people who have worked out how, yet again, to frame and play a better game in that world of possibilities. So in my world, it's about becoming a liberated man. It's about learning to become somebody that masters his attention first, then starts to work with his own mind, his programming, his subconscious, and directs his will. Somebody that understands he has both a physiological, as in a body, and an attentional part of himself. So he has body and he has attention. He has emotional aspects and psychological aspects, so AKA he has narratives, stories, thought forms, the ways in which he's operating in the world. And when we put all that together, well, now we can do a lot of stuff. Like you can start to become more like a type of like an agent inside of a game of self-development, as opposed to some type of like unconscious NPC that is more reacting to this kind of cultural programming at a subconscious level. Because once again, if you don't have a frame, if you don't have a game theory, if you don't have some skills, if you don't have some references, if you don't have the support, or you can't create the support, if you can't attract that support, well, it's going to be like a tough run. Does that make sense?
Yes, certainly.